Welcome to the RSM Talk Big podcast, helping you invest well, understand money, and achieve the best tax outcomes. Your hosts today are Andrew Sykes, Chris Oates, and Young Han.
Hello everyone and welcome to the RSM Talk Big podcast. My name is Andrew Sykes and I'll be your host today, and I'm joined here in the studio with Chris Oates.
G'day everyone.
And Young Han.
Hi everyone.
Okay guys, everyone's favourite topic, energy and energy prices today. Who hasn't felt the pinch of energy prices? What are your clients saying about it, Chris?
It comes with in general the cost of living. Everything, you notice everything going up, but the big thing has been you get your electricity bills, you get your gas bills, everything's expensive.
Everything is expensive. And we're going to talk about that today, and we're fortunate to be joined by RSM partner in the Brisbane office, Jacob Elkhishin. He's our national leader for resource mining, energy and sustainability. Jacob's got a stack of experience, somewhere 18 years, is it, Jacob?
Yes, that's correct.
That's a long time providing advice on ESG and risk and energy. So, Jacob, you're going to talk us through a little bit on energy prices and a few other issues around energy today.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew, and thanks for having me on this podcast. And it's great to be here and talk about this topical issue that's actually impacting everyone at the moment.
Well, it's hugely topical, and it opens up a whole world of energy efficiency, and I think we'd love to have a closer look at things, everyday energy issues, and explore some of those government grants and taxes and incentives, and hopefully give us a bit of a way forward on energy sustainability. So if we start with that, Jacob, what exactly is energy efficiency and how can we measure it?
Yeah, so energy efficiency is actually nothing new. I think we all remember or will still know with respect to appliances, there's energy ratings on those, and you may have noticed them or not noticed them, but that's been going around for as long as I can remember. But I guess it's picking up a bit more of a focus now with new technologies, new possibilities around becoming more efficient. And also, as you mentioned earlier, with respect to the rising energy prices, there is more sort of drive around investment and research and development. The other driver is climate change, which is potentially energy is a contributor to Scope 2 emissions, but also potentially Scope 1 emissions. So these are all the factors, and at the moment, a lot of businesses are being sort of forced to look at that as a cost reduction strategy, and also its contribution to Australia's net zero commitments of 43% in 2030 and zero in 2050.
Yeah, I always thought that energy efficiency was mum coming in and saying, turn the lights off. But probably, and mum still does it. So how does energy efficiency impact on household and businesses? So, or how do energy prices? So if you're not efficient, we pay more. How does that impact on households and businesses?
And Andrew, you joke about the turning off the lights, but when we sort of get under the hood of businesses and assess the energy usage, the energy behaviour, it can be as simple as not that literally, but it can be as simple as watching how you use energy in certain areas by understanding that profile. So, it is actually true that is a component of being energy efficient. But in terms of impact on households and businesses, I think it's important to understand that it is putting a lot of pressure. We mentioned earlier around the increasing costs, but also combined with inflation, with interest rates, it is impacting businesses at that bottom line in terms of having to maintain cash flows and whatnot. I think it's also important to understand what are some of the drivers, just a bit of context around what's sort of driving these prices. And it all comes back to supply and demand. There are combinating factors around that impact both curves around supply and demand. So the Russian war, the sanctions around the sanctions with Russia, mainly impacting gas and coal supply, combination of increasing intermittent renewable energy generation and reducing supply of dispatchable generation. So dispatchable generation are the traditional coal-fired, gas-fired power plants, ultimately decreasing supply, increasing extreme weather events, ultimately increasing demand, so rising temperatures.
Canberra winter.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
So that's impacting the demand profile. And then we're transitioning away from fossil fuels. So we're transitioning away from large coal-fired power plants. They're being decommissioned and not maintained. So there is going to be a need for dispatchable renewable generation in the network. So this is around electricity. So that would include hydro and battery. So during this transition period, we are going to feel a lot of the impact of rising prices or fluctuating prices. So the onus is on businesses to manage that risk and look at how they can be more resilient in the face of changing energy prices. And there are simple steps that I think we can talk about today that businesses can look into and the most simple is just understanding your usage and your energy usage behavior.
Before we jump into that, I'd like to go back to something you said there about the war in Ukraine. I think it's very easy as someone sitting here over in Australia to say, well, they're fighting over there. Why is my gas bill going up? Or why is my energy bill going up? What's the connection between that war and the Australian pricing? If we've got a war in Ukraine, as somebody here in Australia, why are my gas and energy prices going up?
Yep. So great question, Andrew. So it goes back to that supply. So Russia did supply coal and gas in the market. And Australia does also produce gas, but 80% of that gas is sent overseas. So ultimately impacts that supply of gas globally and ultimately impacting Australia. With coal, as you've noticed, coal prices are extremely high, or were extremely high. Again, it's just more demand for that coal in the market. And I think this year was sort of the first year, or last year was the first year ever where thermal coal was more expensive than met coal. So that war in Ukraine has an impact on the global supply of fossil fuel, and then it's just more the energy networks still need fossil fuels at the moment as we're going through this transition. So basically that's the impact on the prices.
So it's that worldwide pricing market. If a producer here in Australia can sell it overseas for 4 or 5 times the price, they will. So we have to pay world prices.
Correct.
Supply-demand economics.
Supply-demand economics.
Yeah, basically. And these contracts Australia has, Australian gas companies have a longer-term contract, so it's nothing that can be done with those. They may have been around before, even before the war started. So, sort of the perfect storm of things happening to result in these record prices.
Yeah, and it's really easy to say, well, why don't we change the contracts? But if they're long-term contracts that made economic sense at the time.
Country to country.
Country to country, it's pretty hard to do, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct.
So you talk a bit about, we were exploring energy efficiency. Are we doing enough in terms of, and you mentioned climate change? There's a lot of discussion around not mining coal and the use of coal, the use of gas. That's one side of the equation. But the other one that you highlighted before is our actual usage. Are we doing enough on the efficiency side?
The short answer to that question is no, and that's nationally within Australia, but you can even extend that to globally. And when I say no, it's relative to the commitments that have been made on a global scale. So as I mentioned, 43% in Australia nationally, reduction in 2030, and then net zero in 2050. There's net zero commitments in other sort of major countries as well. Relative to that, we aren't doing enough, and I know there's sort of two driving pressures, as I mentioned earlier, around the strive for being more efficient with energy. One is just cost savings around prices, but also, as you mentioned now, with respect to climate change. So so I guess no is the answer, but there are some limitations around what you can do with the cost of that investment, the availability of the right technologies. So it's there are a few things to consider, and it's not as simple as doing everything now. I can tell you a bit about what sort of some of the first steps would be as you start to look at your becoming more efficient with energy and ultimately reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
So big picture, energy prices, looking at the cost, but on a day-to-day basis, whether it's individuals, whether it's businesses, everybody being impacted, what's some of the strategies that we could, or practical tips that you've got for people?
Yeah, great question. So I think firstly, it's important to understand your baseline profile. So that's, as I mentioned earlier, energy, behavior and usage. So data is king with most strategic decisions these days. So, and there is so much data available that you can get around your consumption. So in relation to some of the strategies, as I mentioned before, that there have always been appliance energy ratings available. I think for the past 30 years, 6-star rating system around air conditioners, fridges, washing machines, dryers, dishwashers, TVs, and in also around control systems, looking at how you can control energy usage within a building, within a household. Renewable energy is sort of the big one around using solar in residential homes, and also considering purchasing renewable energy from the grid. And also the big sort of the quick win is optimizing lighting using LEDs or compact fluorescent lamps. Just installing that can result in immediate efficiency gains on consumption. And then I can talk about some of the incentives that are out there around that.
So, Jacob, when Mum comes in next time and says turn the light off, we can say, hey, it's an LED and it costs almost nothing to run. So just turn the old-fashioned ones off. I was reading an article a week or two ago which spoke about triple glazing. And they were actually saying that with triple glazing, you don't need a heater in the house.
That's true. I've done it in my house.
You've done it?
Yep. So we had the single glaze, just crappy old windows, and the first thing we did was changing that to UPVC windows. And I was thinking, there's a host of other work that we need to do for the house. Why are you changing window as a first thing? And I just thought, this is waste of money. Nah. In Canberra, wintertime, I didn't even put the heater on because I was getting the sunlight during the day, and it just stays inside a house. I don't lose it until, later 8 o'clock at night.
Jacob, any other tips on using our heaters and actually just reducing our consumption?
Yeah, and obviously triple glazing is sort of the big one at the moment. It can result in lowering your energy costs and better than doubling savings around that. And then in terms of understanding again how much of your heater you use in which different rooms, so having that data and that information, you can actually optimize usage at the right times of the day or in the right rooms, and all of that information is becoming very accessible now through the technological advances.
Some tips for me was that actually just have a look at all the appliances that you have, and if their energy rating is really crappy, you're better off buying a new one, because you're actually going to save your energy bill in long term rather than trying to use... You just review your appliances, and then if you got the appliances that's really old with a really low energy efficiency rate, just remove it, just replace it with a new one that has got an energy rating high enough so that you are going to save energy bill in long term. And also another thing was about, looking at changing from gas to electricity. So according to the Climate Council data, you can actually save 500 to 1,900 per year if you actually change from the gas to electricity. And new dwellings at the moment, you actually cannot have a gas.
Not in Canberra. So it's banned in Canberra, new gas. Yep. So, Jacob, if I can ask you, we're talking about making some changes. Energy efficient upgrades expensive?
Yes, they do. They are expensive, but as there's more provider supplies, it'll bring the cost down, and as new technology advances, it'll bring the cost down as well. But we're moving to the point where there isn't going to be much choice. So I guess the early adopting sort of puts you ahead of the game. And then the other thing to consider is there are incentives out there that potentially could help with that cost. And then, whilst the initial investment may be high, the return on investment could be greater over the longer term, as Young mentioned, by investing in these things. So it's important to consider the full sort of buyback period and whatnot when you're making these decisions. But as I initially stated, it's also important to consider the data, because you may invest in something that results in being more efficient for energy in a particular appliance that you don't really use, or in a particular area that you don't really use, so you won't get that higher return on investment or that longer term buyback.
And it's where we've talked before about the power of compound interest. If you're going to make the change, you use solar panels and batteries. Storage is the example. A lot of people waited because they thought the batteries were expensive. But if you've started saving and you've started those energy savings, it's a matter of doing it and making the most of it, so that you sort of think if you wait 5 years because the batteries seem too expensive, the savings you could have made over that time, you're probably losing out. Down the right path there, Jake?
Yeah, that's correct. And when I say yes, it's more for the larger sort of such as renewables, but the easy quick wins that Young mentioned around switching to electrical appliances, looking at that the Energy Star rating. So those are easy wins that potentially don't cost as much, and then can provide a quicker return on investment and break-even point.
And speaking about the solar panel, I think there's a lot of providers actually offer that, and they always give you a call and say, oh, there's a government grant available, it won't cost you anything, just get it set up. I think the tip, and this is from my experience, is that don't look at the upfront cost, look at how much they're going to pay you when they buy back your energy, because in long term, that's what's going to save you money and make the investment worthwhile. So looking at that kind of different providers, looking at how much they're going to buy back for your electricity, and that's how you can make the decision. If you don't have that lump sum money available in your bank account, you can look into different incentives as well.
Yeah, so Jacob, a lot of this, and we've spoken about, obviously it's very important in an inflationary environment. Everyone's focused on costs and savings and why does everything go up. But we've also spoken about other things, which is around climate change and renewable energy, and that leads us into that ESG, or environmental, social and governance considerations. What is ESG, and how important is it in making these kinds of decisions and in today's business landscape?
Yeah, so from a business standpoint, ESG is probably one of the hottest topics that I am speaking to boards about, and it does relate back to risk management 101. So ESG is nothing really new. It sort of originated from the financial markets. It sort of relates to corporate social responsibility. It relates to triple bottom line reporting. So it's not a new concept, but ESG is really a catch-all to enable businesses to provide transparency to stakeholders on non-financial components of their business. So the term ESG is really, these are the three pillars around environmental, social and governance, and there are risks associated across each of those three pillars, and there are interdependencies between the three pillars too. You can't, being environmentally conscious ultimately provides a better social benefit, and then you need that right governance around that. So there are interdependencies, but from a financial markets perspective, it provides stakeholders more transparency on what businesses are doing outside of the financial aspect of their business. So all financial reporting, especially for ASX listed, are public. So you can do a lot of analysis on the financial part of the business. It's more capturing what's the business doing in relation to the transition transition to net zero, what are businesses doing around community, social value, what are businesses doing around governance. So it provides a metric to understand that longer term sustainability of a business. That's where it all comes from, and that's essentially, I guess, what I believe is the intent behind it. It's purely around providing more transparency.
That's measuring just not financial impacts, but social, environmental impacts. It's almost like you're saying, hey, well, it's measuring doing the right thing and being a good corporate citizen. Is that a fair comment?
And ultimately, the stakeholders of a business, being their customers, being their shareholders, being their financiers, their employees even, they all have a vested interest in these aspects of a business, and ESG is designed to make that more transparent to these stakeholders so that they can value a business over a longer term sustainability point of view.
I think the easiest way to explain this just in day-to-day individuals is that we need to have the environment safe for our next generation. If we don't have the nature and the environment that we have now, what's going to future look like? We can't do business if we don't have that environment. If we can't do any more trades between countries and have a travel tourists happening if we don't have the environment to enjoy. So I think it comes down to that side of, very basic things. Why is it important for us? Is it because of the financial requirement? Is it because it needs to be transparent? I think it's really simple as we need to take care of the environment.
Yeah, I think it's where a lot of people in the past, it's always been about the bottom line and the dollar getting the best outcome, whereas now there's a lot more people, there's a lot more emphasis on doing the right thing. That's where, as you said, the finance is, just getting people to work for you.
Yeah. So, Jacob, you mentioned that ESG is a hot topic. Are you seeing that these ESG considerations are now becoming more and more important, making a bigger factor in major business decisions?
100%. It may not impact a business directly, but there is 100% an indirect impact, because a business's customers may be making decisions based on an ESG rating of their supplier. So ultimately, it is influencing decisions from, as I mentioned before, with investors, with suppliers, customers, with banks, and with employees. They're looking to these factors to influence their decision on who they work for, who they provide funding for, and who they buy from. So basically, yes, is the answer to that question.
And terrific. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you for your time today. Chris and Young, thanks for your time, and everyone who's joined us on the RSM Talk Big podcast. We hope you found that discussion interesting and insightful. ESG, environment, energy efficiency are all incredibly important and interesting topics. RSM does a lot of work in this area, and we have a lot of information available. If you want to go and read up more on this, just go to RSMU and you'll find a stack of information there on ESG, energy efficiency, and we have just released our Think Big report on sustainability, which is going to give you more insights and strategies and more in depth on this topic. Thank you once again for tuning into the RSM Talk Big podcast. My name's Andrew Sykes. I've been your host for today, and you can subscribe, share, leave on your favourite podcast platform. We'll talk to you next time.
Talk Big. Create, save and protect with RSM.